In House of the Dragon, one of the biggest parts of Daemon's character is his love for his big brother Viserys. In fact, I would even venture to say that Viserys is the only person that Daemon has ever truly loved out of all the people that are around him. People may bring up Laena, who, sure, he cared for her and she is the mother of his two oldest daughters, but caring for her is about it. Laena herself even established in episode 5 that there are limits to the depths of their connection with each other, which Daemon even echoes later on in episode 7 of season 1 when asked if he actually loved Laena, only saying that they were happy enough. I think the same applies to Rhaenyra as well. They have a bond and a connection, and he cares about her, but despite fighting a war for her, faking a death, and committing multiple murders for her, I wouldn't say that Daemon is actually in love with Rhaenyra. They aren't soulmates, and that is a hill I am going to die on. I don't care what anyone says. But when it comes to Viserys, it's a bit different. At the core of Daemon's character is a person who needs to be needed. He wants to be seen and recognized, and for a long time, the person he wanted recognition from was his big brother Viserys. He goes to great lengths to just be acknowledged by him, like that time he took over Dragonstone. It wasn't just some play for power, it was a ploy to get his brother's attention. He wants to be close to Viserys, and hates being dismissed and sent away in favor of people like Otto Hightower. This is why he wanted to be heir to the Iron Throne, not solely because it would mean becoming the most powerful man in Westeros one day. Granted, Viserys never had a living son of his own, but because it was the closest position to his big bro. But beyond that, there was another position which arguably held the same amount of meaning to Daemon as being the heir. In episode 1 of House of the Dragon, Daemon is confronted by his older brother for a joke he allegedly made about Viserys' son, Balon, celebrating his status as heir and styling his late nephew as the heir for a day, as he only lived for a few hours after being born. The conversation later takes a shift as Daemon calls out Viserys for being weak and easily manipulated by the people around him. He says that in the 10 years that Viserys reigned as his own brother, he should have been made Hand of the King, citing his loyalty as being enough of a requirement. Now, we know it takes more than being loyal to be an effective hand, so it's no wonder Daemon never got the job. But what if he did? What if during Viserys' reign, he made his younger brother the second most powerful man in the realm? How would history change? Now, the premise of this what if is going to take place early on in Viserys' reign as king, like within his very first days of becoming a king. So we're not going to say that Daemon gets named Hand after he comes back from Pentos after Laena's death or anything like that. As usual, when it comes to these scenarios, I like to think up ways changes can occur that make sense for the characters and actually fit into the world. When I think about Daemon becoming Hand, it doesn't seem like something that actually makes sense to even happen when viewing things from the perspective of Viserys. Daemon isn't really a political guy or well-versed in ruling like Otto Hightower was. Say what you will about his scheming, but Otto has a mind for politics and court, unlike Daemon. He's well-versed in matters of the realm and has proven himself capable. He must have if old King Jaehaerys decided to make him his hand. And for Viserys, coming in as a young king off the heels of a man many consider to be the greatest king of the Targaryen dynasty outside of Aegon the Conqueror, it makes a lot of sense why he would want to keep Otto around. There's a comfort there. This is a guy who knows what he's doing, which is likely why he brought him back later on after Lionel Strong died. And I think that maybe within that knowledge I just presented, we can facilitate a change in decision for Viserys that makes sense. That desire for comfort and assurance, which I think falls in line with Viserys' character since he often looks to take the easy way out of making certain decisions. The comfortable option in this case when it comes to naming a hand would be Daemon. Well, why? Viserys is very unsure of his future reign as a young king, and continuing the legacy of his grandfather. He recognizes that there may be qualities that he lacks that his brother does not. Daemon is a warrior, tried and true, and Viserys wants to feel secure. What better way to feel secure than to have a warrior at his side as his hand? Not to mention his own brother, who is fiercely loyal to him. In Fire and Blood, Daemon even gathered a small army to defend his brother when he put his claim forward for the throne. Seeing Daemon's influence over others and his ability to command like that could also play into his decision to name him Hand after taking up the crown. He feels like he has a pillar of support, someone who's gonna have his back no matter what happens, and that's his brother. Then if we want to go outside of that to somewhere a little more simple, maybe he just thinks that as brothers, they're meant to rule together. If things had gone to plan, their father Balon the Brave would be king. So is it not fitting that after his death, both his sons rise to power to rule the realm? He could see it as a way of honoring Balon, as if this is what he would have wanted even in his death, for them to always stick together. Now, with reasoning out of the way, how does our story end up changing with Daemon as the Hand of the King? Well, first off, to be honest, when I think of Daemon as Hand, I don't really see him being anything particularly special. He's a soldier, a commander, and inspires people to fight for him, but he's not a politician. The machinations of court aren't exactly his forte if I'm being honest, so I don't really see him being anything that revolutionary when it comes to being Hand of the King. When I think of this pair ruling the Seven Kingdoms together, I think of Aenys and Maegor. Aenys and Maegor were the two sons of Aegon the Conqueror, and after he died, Aenys became king and named his younger brother as his hand. Aenys wasn't the best king. He was weak-willed, got influenced by others pretty easily, and was very indecisive. His brother Maegor was the opposite. Strong-willed, quick to anger, unyielding, but he wasn't a good politician either. But the two of them managed to make things work for a couple years. Maegor never made a move against his brother while he was alive. He even sorted out rebellions for Aenys before he was even Hand of the King. So I guess when I think about Daemon and Viserys, I think of a new age Aenys and Maegor, the amiable, indecisive king, and his brother who serves to be his reinforcement, an iron fist, and means of making the hard decisions. I don't see there being many big changes in the early parts of Viserys' reign, to be honest. The story goes about the same up until the events of Hot D. Now, as we venture into that story, let's talk about Otto. Just because he isn't Hand in this timeline doesn't mean he won't have a presence in the story. As I said earlier, Otto has proven himself to be a valuable asset in the service of King Jaehaerys, and I think Viserys wouldn't be keen to let that go. So even if he wasn't Hand of the King, he would still be given a position on the council, like Master of Laws or Master of Coin. This makes sense because this is what he did to Daemon in canon. Even though he wasn't named Hand, he was still given some form of position in his brother's court. So the roles are a bit reversed here, but unlike Daemon, Otto isn't going to be constantly moved around to various positions, which brings me to my next point. The City Watch. If Daemon becomes Hand of the King, it's unlikely that he ever becomes commander of the City Watch. The only reason this even happened is because of Otto. He didn't trust having Daemon on the small council and begged for him to be taken off of it. He's the reason he was put in charge of the Watch in the first place. And this is pretty important because Daemon is the reason the City Watch even became effective. He gave them better equipment. He gave them their gold cloaks, and that is the reason they're even called gold cloaks in canon. They thrived under him, but if he's never moved around, never dismissed from the council and put in charge of the Watch, then they don't grow to become his personal army, and probably remain underdeveloped as a result. Though that is assuming that Daemon never takes an interest in bolstering the defenses within the city. Daemon tends to enjoy aggression and violence, so I could see him taking up an independent interest in the Watch at some point, but even with that being said, it still makes sense if he doesn't, given that no one seemed to care about the City Watch, not even Daemon until he was forced on it. But moving on. The real changes in this timeline would occur with the deaths of Aemma and Balon, because this is when the talks of Viserys' succession come into play. Originally, after their deaths, Otto called a meeting as Hand of the King to discuss an heir for Viserys. Everyone seemed pretty on board with the fact that Daemon would be heir to the throne, as Viserys' brother and the only other male Targaryen of the royal family. But Otto hated Daemon and didn't think he had the capacity to be a ruler, so he said that Rhaenyra should be heir over Daemon as the king's firstborn child. It's funny that he did that considering later on he would go against her claim, but it's also very unsurprising considering that in his mind, Rhaenyra being heir was never supposed to be a long-term or serious thing. It was a half measure until another alternative that wasn't Daemon showed up. However, I don't think this would happen in this timeline. While Otto would still be a member of the small council, he is not the Hand of the King. His power has been severely diminished. Otto is not the Lord of Old Town. His brother Hobart is. He is a second son with nothing to his name outside of a seat on the council. We know Otto is no stranger to speaking out against Daemon and his antics, but a part of the reason he was even able to do that is because he was the second most powerful man in the realm. But now, Daemon is. Would Otto really risk openly questioning Daemon as heir to the Iron Throne when he's Hand of the King, when defiance can mean his position on the council and potentially death? For someone like him, it would definitely seem like a stupid decision. What I think happens is that with Daemon as hand of the king, no one questions him being heir to the throne. The primary instigator during this conflict originally was Otto, and now he doesn't have the standing to question Daemon without facing possible backlash. Not to mention, everyone else was pretty on board with Daemon being heir until Otto said something anyway. Corlys said that Daemon was the heir to the throne, and Lionel Strong at the time thought it was ridiculous to even consider a girl like Rhaenyra for the position as well. So the whole debate about Rhaenyra and Daemon just doesn't happen. Then after that, I would even say that the whole heir for a day remark is removed as well. As we know, after the death of Balon, Daemon went for a night on the town with the city watch and Mysaria to celebrate his retained status as heir to the throne. But if Daemon is not the commander of the city watch this time around, it probably doesn't make sense for him to throw a big party with them on the Street of Silk. In fact, because he's hand of the king and would have held the closest position to his brother for about a decade at this point, I believe he would be more inclined to support Viserys during his time of grief than to go on the town with his people. He'd feel more obligated to be there for his brother, to console him through the deaths of his wife and son. So in this timeline, I would say the initial conflict between Viserys and Daemon that formed after the deaths of Aemma and Balon doesn't happen. And as a result, Daemon remains heir to the Iron Throne over Rhaenyra, which I would say makes sense considering all the factors that went into her being named as heir in the first place originally. It wasn't because Viserys saw greatness in Rhaenyra that was overlooked for ages. It was because Otto recommended it and brought up the idea. Up until that point, Viserys had no intention of choosing between Rhaenyra and Daemon. It was also because he felt guilty about killing her mother Aemma, and thought making her heir would make amends for that. But what really put the nail in the coffin was Daemon's heir for a day fiasco. He proved himself to be unfit in his brother's eyes. But that changes here. While I don't think Daemon would be the most effective hand, his loyalty and closeness to his brother Viserys throughout the years could give the king more incentive to keep him as an heir. And with people like Otto not willing to question the status of the hand of the king and make Viserys question his choice in heir, then Daemon sticks around as such, which definitely has ramifications later on. One that comes to mind is the relationship between Viserys and Alicent. Otto, even with his reduced status at court, would still make moves to get his blood on the Iron Throne. He still deems Daemon as unfit to take the Iron Throne one day. That is not something that is going to change, so he will push his daughter Alicent towards the king. But I think the presence of Daemon could alter how close Viserys and Alicent end up getting. The main reason Viserys even chose Alicent to be his new wife is because he felt comfortable around her. He didn't really have a support system when Aemma died. Rhaenyra was distant, Daemon was off holding Dragonstone in defiance, which wouldn't have been a thing in this timeline since he never would have left to begin with, and Alicent pretty much was the only person to talk to Viserys like a person. She understood his grief and was kind to him, gave him support when he had none. So it's pretty easy to see why he ended up attaching to her, but I think things will play out differently here. With Daemon remaining in King's Landing, he remains a constant pillar of support for his older brother. After all, he's literally his right-hand man. Daemon's prolonged time in King's Landing and at the side of Viserys could diminish any connection he strikes up with Alicent, because he doesn't have to rely on her so heavily like he did in canon. I see Daemon trying to push his brother to be more present as a king and ruler instead of wallowing in grief for too long. This is how he was with Rhaenyra in Season 2 when she was grieving. He gave her time as a mother, but she was still a ruler and things needed to be done. I think it would be the same way with Viserys. I also don't think he would push too hard for him to get remarried either. His mindset would be that as king, Viserys can do whatever he wants, so he doesn't need to get remarried because his council says so. Also, he would still effectively be heir to the throne at this point, and as we also see in Season 2, he still had ambitions for the Iron Throne even after marrying Rhaenyra, so maybe on the flip side of things, he wants to retain that status and wants to block the possibility of any potential rivals. But even if we do go that route, I still think Viserys would end up remarrying, and because of his reduced connection to Alicent and being pushed by his brother to not shirk his duties, he would end up marrying Laena Velaryon, since it's the one that makes the most political sense and offers the most advantage. Though with that being said, it would be some time away before he could actually marry Laena since she is 12 when that whole meeting with the Velaryons goes down. So they have to wait a bit. This would be a pretty big change since if Viserys marries Laena, then Corlys never resigns as Master of Ships, and the houses Targaryen and Velaryon stay on good terms. This could also mean that when Corlys decides to attack the Stepstones, the crown actually takes him seriously. Daemon would definitely push for assisting Corlys because he is a warrior at heart, and he likes battle. So the war for the Stepstones would end up being a combined effort effort between the crown and House Velaryon. So the conflict might wrap up a bit quicker than it did in canon. I doubt that Daemon will be named King of the Narrow Sea in this instance though, since Corlys isn't in defiance of the royal family now that his daughter is set up to be queen. And Daemon probably doesn't even need to prove himself to his brother anymore. He's already Hand of the King, and probably the closest person to Viserys at this point as well. So there's no point in claiming such a bogus title. Now, as we move on from that, a few years will go by and eventually Laena will marry King Viserys and give him some children. Considering she had twins with Daemon in canon, I'm willing to bet the same thing happens here, but instead of having two girls, I'm gonna say she has a son and a daughter. Different children because they have different fathers this time around. The son's name would be Aegon, and the daughter would be named Alyssa. Aegon because of Aegon the Conqueror, and the Targs love recycling that name, and also because when they were kids, Viserys and Daemon actually had a little brother named Aegon, but he died when he was still a baby. So in a way, Viserys is honoring him. And the daughter is named Alyssa because that was the name of Viserys and Daemon's mother. So once again, he's showing respect for those who have passed. Now, that being said, we have a conversation about the succession. Given that Daemon was Hand of the King in this timeline, and his position as heir to the throne was never questioned by Otto, and Daemon never got himself disinherited, a precedent was set once again for male inheritance. So with the birth of a son to the king, Aegon, his son with Laena, will be named heir to the Iron Throne instead of his uncle and his older sister Rhaenyra. This is definitely a scenario where I can't exactly see the dance happening, if I'm being honest. Rhaenyra really wouldn't have that much importance in a political conflict if she's never named heir by her father. If people keep deferring to males given that Daemon was never challenged, there is no reason for anyone to go against her little brother. Except maybe Daemon if he still wants to be heir, but he lacks a legal foundation that most people will be willing to fight for, in my opinion. And then it begs the question of if he'd really be willing to fight his own nephew for the throne like Maegor did in the past. Sure, in canon, he's not against killing the Greens, who are also his brother's children, but in his eyes, that's justified, given the idea that he believes they stole his brother's throne. That wouldn't be the case if Aegon was simply named heir by Viserys over him. Now, I'm sure there are still some questions about certain issues that Daemon caused in canon, like him trying to sleep with Rhaenyra, which I doubt he'll even do in this timeline. The whole point of taking her out to a brothel and trying to sleep with her, or make it look like he did, was to force Viserys' hand so they could get married, and Daemon could be king through her. There's no real advantage to doing that now since Rhaenyra is not in line to inherit the Iron Throne, and if things go well with Laena, he may just get pushed down the line of succession anyway. So Rhaenyra really doesn't matter. She has no real foundation here. If we cut that whole scenario out, then maybe we can cut out Daemon being exiled from King's Landing and going back to the Vale to kill his wife, Lady Rhea Royce, in a bid to claim Runestone for himself. Also, going back to Rhaenyra, if that fiasco with Daemon doesn't happen, it's also unlikely she will get married to Laenor. The whole thing happened because she made a very poor decision to go out with her uncle, and marrying Laenor was her punishment for breaking the rules, and also a way to mend the rift between houses Targaryen and Velaryon. Here, that's different. She doesn't expose herself that way, and there's no need to mend the rift between the families because Viserys married Laena. So that's a marriage you can potentially take off the table. Maybe Rhaenyra can marry Harwin Strong or Jason Lannister if that deal goes through. Who knows? Other than that, I don't really see anything important happening in this timeline. While there are some interesting aspects here with the dance pretty much being averted due to Viserys keeping with precedent, I don't think that there's too much else I feel like exploring in this timeline. So this is where I'm going to end the video. You guys let me know what you thought down below and what changes you think would have also made sense for this timeline. For now though, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, subscribe for more videos, and I will see you all next time.